Autism Spectrum Disorder, otherwise known as ASD, by Catherine Bentley for Dr. Zelenka, Fort Hays State University. Let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to talk about what is autism spectrum disorder. ASD was first identified in 43 by Dr. Leo Kanner and is a range of neurodevelopmental disorders that affects a person's social and communication abilities. Previously, there were different types of autism, such as Asperger's syndrome, pervasive developmental disorder, not otherwise specified, autistic disorder, childhood disintegrative disorder. But today, all of these are found within the range of autism spectrum disorder. There's a lot of research going into ASD currently. It's still not known exactly what causes ASD, but some things such as genetics, environmental factors, and brain wiring are things that are considered when looking at children with ASD. Today, we really look more at levels of ASD. Level 1 are those students that are probably going to be in the general education classroom for the vast majority of the time, maybe with a para present for assistance. They might do their schoolwork okay, but they will most likely need more help on the social relationship part of their curriculum. Level 2 requires substantial support, so these students might end up being in the general education sometimes in the day, and other times they might end up being in the special education for the rest of the day. They might have a para with them. These children might end up being able to do some of the schoolwork, but they also are going to need assistance in their social relationship skills. And level 3 are those students that require very substantial support. So these students are the ones that might end up being in the special education classroom for the majority of the day. They might really struggle with their schoolwork, their language will not be quite as developed. Their social relationship skills may not be anywhere near as developed either. So these kids are going to be the ones that might be in the special education classroom more than the level 1 or level 2 kids. Let's talk about the ASD prevalence. ASD occurs in 1 in 68 children. It affects all ethnic groups. Today, more white children are diagnosed with ASD, but this is mostly due to just the amount of accessible health care for white citizens. It occurs in males 4 to 5 times as often as it does girls. And the prevalence of ASD has been steadily rising in the last decade. So currently it is a low incidence disability, but in coming years, it might actually be a high incidence disability because the numbers are coming in more and more frequently for autism spectrum disorder. There should also be awareness that there are some cultural stigmas around ASD, such as the Catholic belief that autism spectrum disorder happens for the parents' past sins. And some of these children do not have the best home lives. So as teachers, we have to really look out for these kids. Social relationships in ASD. So these children are going to have difficulty establishing relationships from young age. A lot of these children will be diagnosed with ASD as young as 2 to 3 years of age. And one of the biggest key indicators is that they don't want to be touched by their parents. They avoid cuddling and all kinds of stuff. They don't like to be touched. They resist human eye contact. They are very disinterested in relationships with others. They don't really appreciate talking. If they are verbal at all, they will try not to speak to their peers, and they have a hard time making friends because of this, and they avoid attention. A lot of children will say, hey, look at me, look at what I did. These children will not. So we kind of have to keep an eye on them to make sure that they are doing okay in school. Communication in ASD, as said earlier, ASD children have delayed language development. They have difficulty maintaining conversations with others. This makes it very difficult for them to make friends. Their social lives are quite limited. They use behaviors instead of words. If ever you have an ASD student, just stand up and walk out of the classroom. Know that this is him telling you that he is uncomfortable or that he's having something else going on, and that's his way of telling you instead of walking up to you and saying, this is what's happening. They are also known for echolalic speech or being nonverbal. Echolalic speech is where you will say something and then this ASD student will repeat part of what you said back to you. Or they can be nonverbal. They won't say anything at all. And some of these nonverbal students will be able to learn ASL, or they'll be able to use communication devices. So a lot of the time, it'll be really helpful to know at least a little bit of American Sign Language. And if possible, there can be an interpreter for these students that are using ASL. Student interests. So students with ASD typically have narrow ranges of interests. They focus on one thing, such as insects, and they learn all about insects. They can tell, if they are verbal, they can tell you all about insects. It becomes a large part of their personality. Sometimes they're parallel to a professional on their interest topic just because they know so much about that topic. It can seem kind of like they know everything about it. Like music and art are two things that some ASD students can really focus in on, and their work becomes so exceedingly great that they're almost professional on their interests. However, their interests can also further affect social relationships, since this is one of the things these students will talk about very, very repetitively, very often. Sometimes it interferes with their social relationships just because the other kids do not want to hear about insects or music or art all hours of the day. Student stresses. Students with ASD have very, very low thresholds for stress, and they can respond with anxiety. Stressors for ASD students can be as small as classroom seating changes, changes in routines, loud noises, strong smells such as perfumes. Some students will enjoy music, others will not enjoy it as much just because it is quite loud and it can be a big stressor for them. So that is something to take into account. ASD students can respond with restricted and repetitive behaviors such as spinning an item, twirling, rocking, etc. And they can occasionally be aggressive and disruptive, and in which cases a professional will need to come in to be able to deal with these children. The diversity of students with ASD. So having ASD does not define a student as a person. It's not who they are. It's a student with a disability, not an ASD student. So some of these students, as stated, have severe intellectual disabilities, and others may have okay work in the classroom, but they struggle more with the communication and the relationships. Most ASD students will spend time in general education classrooms, and a few will spend most of their time in the special education classrooms. Another thing to really take into account is that many children with ASD have secondary learning disabilities, such as orthopedic impairment or a visual hearing impairment. Come on. So how do we deal with students in the classroom that have autism spectrum disorder? We have to be really careful on how we deal with their behaviors. Some behaviors with students with ASD can be disturbing and distracting to teachers and students who do not understand them. So one way that we can do this is to teach understanding and acceptance in our students. And one way to limit these behaviors that can be distracting or disturbing is to create a structured, routine classroom. And a lot of these behaviors can also be changed with behavior support programs and oftentimes minor interventions. So that same child discussed earlier that just walked out of the classroom may have just needed a 5-minute break. One small minor intervention could be just to bring him back into the classroom, have him sit down at a desk for 5 minutes, and offer him something small to eat. Something small can actually really alter these behaviors and prevent them from happening in the classroom. Fostering social interactions in students with ASD. We need to really look at these ASD students and observe their behaviors to understand why they're doing it. And if we understand the why they're behaving the way they do, we might be able to offer a small intervention, as discussed earlier, and prevent it from happening again in the classroom. And we can teach students about waiting and taking turns, stopping an activity before its completion, being more flexible, being quiet, and monitoring their own behaviors to students with ASD to really foster their social interactions, allow them to learn how to work with other children, how to communicate with other children. And communicating with students with ASD, some students can communicate with speech and others cannot, as mentioned earlier. Some of them will be nonverbal, echolalic, or they'll need communication devices. And others will learn ASL, and at times an interpreter will be available, as said earlier. Some students use communication boards, like switches and scanning devices that are used for children with the motor function to push buttons and pictures. One way to communicate with students is, since these children oftentimes won't want to talk to you, it'll also be useful to bear in mind that these children respond better to pictures than to words. So one way we can help these students in the classroom is to provide written/picture rules of expectations of behavior in the classroom. Use descriptive praise to support ideal behaviors. Instead of just saying, "Good job for throwing it away," you say, "I like the way that you threw your trash in the trash can." Make them understand what you are looking for by using very descriptive language. And also be sure to give positive directions instead of negative words. Instead of saying, "Don't do that," you can say, "Please sit down. Please listen." Don't say, "Don't hit." Just say, "Please sit down." Teacher-parent communication is vital for students with ASD, just like any other student, but it's especially important with students with ASD because these parents really need to know what's going on to help you better maintain their children, help their children learn in the classroom. All right, so that's my presentation on students with ASD, and this is my Works Cited page. I hope everyone learned a little bit of something about students with ASD.